Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spin Rack, and we also have.
Alvin Ellis, ready to rock.
Well, today we're gonna go to the Tom Brevoort, his blog, where he goes into a Lee and Kirby back and forth. He did chapters comparing the original Captain America to the Captain America that they did in the '60s in Tales of Suspense. He also did a thing on the creation of Spider-Man, highlighting the Joe Simon, CC Beck, Silver Spider, which led to what is it? Jack Kirby doing 5 pages that was similar to that, with the costume that was similar to some stuff, some leftover stuff from Simon and Kirby, and then obviously then saying Steve Ditko taking over that. But then what we get to here is what is called the first-hand account from Jack Kirby. The great Jack Kirby in the '70s decided to make his own account of of what the creation of Marvel, right? And I guess this is around the time those what is it the he just handwritten wrote down this stuff of what the creation of these characters were, and for his, I guess, and this has been taken as sort of I was trying to see a date on this. I thought I saw a date, but he writes down as no. This was done in the '70s, and since I have you here, can you see it? And not the one not the one that's handwritten. I want to get to something here. Okay, here. Are you able to see that? Cal, you there? I lose you.
I think you muted me somehow.
I
But yeah,
think
I can see
I
all of
didn't,
it.
I didn't plan. Okay. So
Trying out your
here
Mario skills, huh? Okay.
I didn't plan on reading you. So here basically makes a list of, in his own handwriting, of the creation of the Fantastic Four. Now, this would be, ultimately, this would be, I think this has been taken as ironclad creation of these characters, right? And the stuff that's tough for me is this first part here, where it says Captain America formulated by myself, and Joe Simon, created in Joe's apartment. So let's keep that in mind. It says created in Joe's apartment. That's important to note. And then outside of this stuff, talking about um, this thing right here, where he says, I suggested Stan Lee to initiate a new superhero line. So that would lead the entire creation of Marvel to Jack Kirby. That he came up with the line, he came up with these characters, and basically um, Martin Goodman approved it, and they moved forward with Jack Kirby's ideas, with Stan not letting him write it.
Okay.
So
All right.
now I
Oh,
believe a lot of before you could chime in, I just want to say I believe a lot of people are taking this as proof that he did it alone.
proof of what?
That Jack Kirby came up with a new line of characters and went to went to Marvel with them. Said, you guys, to help out, you guys should do a superhero line, and Martin Goodman said yes. And he also had the Sergeant Fury, because obviously he's into you know like one of the hard parts is, I'm going to go back.
Hold on, hold on, hold on. Go back to Spider-Man.
Oh God. Oh God, which you want to see, the handwritten one, or this? Or you want to
Hold
hear?
on, hold
Oh,
on.
clear.
Spider-Man grew out of a different script called The Silver Spider, which was written by Joe Simon's brother-in-law, who is now deceased. Joe was out in the field at the time. I utilized the Silver Spider script to create a single new Oh my God. Okay. Yeah, all right. I'm sorry. I needed to see that again. Okay, go ahead. Go.
But see, no, you stopped. Can you continue after that? Can you continue reading the last bit?
This was given for development to Steve Ditko after I drew the first cover with the original costume. Mm.
So Kirby has long said that he created the character because that cover was his cover, which it is his cover, inked by
This
Steve Ditko, and that's where a lot of the other Marvel characters like Iron Man, the ones that he didn't do the interiors, some of the basic design was there. So the design of Iron Man, because the cover, because I think Don Heck said, because they were at one point attributing the art to the first Iron Man to Kirby and saying it was done over Kirby layouts. And Don Heck said, no, I drew that all myself. And, obviously, a plot from Larry Lieber and the plot from Stan Lee, a script from Larry Lieber, and then Don Heck drew it. But the initial design for Iron Man was Jack Kirby. So I think he's taken that thinking and put it to Spider Man, that since he did the cover, he designed it. And this is what these statements are the first when Steve Ditko first heard that. That's what led him to finally speak out and say that the this cover was not the first cover, that Stan rejected Steve Ditko's cover. But Jack Kirby, no one has in this thing, they won't correct him on these things. And this is the hard part for me, that some of this aspect, and you say correct them, how much can I correct them on? I don't have any proof that Jack Kirby didn't come to stand with the FF and the Hulk and Spider. Like we stand. Steve Ditko did say he came to him with Spider-Man, not telling Stan that it was a Silver Spider, but coming to him with that.
this isn't proof that he did.
Yes,
This
yes.
isn't proof that he did. Yes, great. We have some letters, some handwritten letters by. This doesn't mean any of that stuff. This corroborates a narrative that you have. Okay, but you would have to have more. I mean, no. It's just not enough to corroborate it at the end of the day, because I would have to believe that you would have to have something in writing from somebody else, and then oh, good grief. I mean, this type of stuff over here for me is like really borderline, because I love Kirby's stuff. I respect all the contributions that he's made, but this right over here is like really out of pocket. Like it's just dishonest at the end of the day. If you've paid even like the smallest amount of attention to the history of how these characters are created. One of the reasons I wanted to look back at Spider-Man, because Spider-Man shouldn't even be there for contention. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna pause on that just for a moment. I was watching this show on YouTube that was saying what happened to why Rogue was cut. Why was Rogue cut from X-Men Days of Future Past? And this guy was going on this, but one of the things that stood out to me, he said something about Jack Kirby's X-Men. So I was like, what? Jack Kirby's X-Men? So I remember leaving a comment like, I think you mean Jack Kirby's Fourth World. The X-Men are not Jack Kirby's, that's not Jack Kirby's stuff at the end of the day. But then, if you keep pages like this open with people, you like literally, it's just all Jack all the time, all his writing with nothing else at the end of the day. That's how that narrative begins. Spider-Man, okay, it's clear. It's clear how that character was created. Now, I don't want to go with any of the other ones. I don't think those are any more clear, but this one is a slam dunk at the end of the day. Okay. And even here, he's still like, well, no, I got, I was in there from the ground up and so on and so forth. Like, no, that's not what happened. Okay. And you have more than one person. You have more than one person. Ditko himself coming in like, no, that's not what happened at the end of the day. So I'm really not sure where Kirby was at this point with this sort of stuff, other than, there was definitely some hard feelings on his point, or he felt the need to say, or to say something of this nature, or to write, or to try to prevaricate that this was actually what happened. But it's just not. There's plenty of research, plenty of people who were there, at the time, or people who were able to speak with these people at the time. You have Kirby's changing narrative over decades. And you look at this stuff and like, no, you really, after a while, you can't do this, because you're going to come over here and aggrandize him to a stature that he shouldn't be at. And the truth always out. So then it's going to come over here, and then what's going to happen? You're going to savage him. because like, oh, all the stuff that he did, I just don't, I don't, again, I don't get why they do this. It was like when I was talking with you about you were asking me about the whole, if I saw this new thing on Muhammad Ali, and I'm like, after a while, you guys need to, to back off this stuff. Uh, just let it go organically for, the interest that people had. Everybody knows that Kirby and Stan Lee worked together on this stuff. As to how much they worked on every individual thing, that's something else. But Fantastic Four, the idea that Jack Kirby came and went to the publisher with these particular ideas, and that's what and that's what jump started, originated everything that went off from the Marvel universe, without even the acknowledgement that, hey, if he had even said, hey, I saw how well Justice League of America was working for DC Comics for National, and it said, hey, why don't we do something over here at Marvel like that? That would be a little bit more akin to just, hey, I just decided, everything's shutting down. Why don't we do this right over? Why don't we do this right over here? And then the argument again is Marvel was shutting down in 1959. Okay, didn't they? I thought they at the very least had. I thought, the idea that they were shutting down in 59 and these characters come out in 61, a full 2 years later, it is right there. It has to be some sort of discrepancy. And I know they had a bona fide hit in the Rawhide Kid and some of the other stuff that they were maybe not as much with the Rawhide Kid, but they definitely weren't on their last legs. It wasn't Fawcett where these guys were like, all right, we had a good run, time to pack up shop, even though this was their third. I mean, you had Timely, Atlas, and then this is their third entity at the end of the day. But there's so much out there that's corroborated that refutes a lot of this. And after a while, it just gets, I'm flabbergasted at the end of the day that one, that he went this route, and then two, that you have a page that's not looking to, that's not looking to really get to the bottom of it and put this, because it keeps, well, it's like the old phrase they say about a lie. Lie makes it, around the world in the time the truth is putting its sneakers on.
Yeah, it's hard for me because we go. The thing is like this, right? And you can excuse everything because Kirby had a bad memory, but some of this stuff we go to. Let's share the screen again, and let's take the basic thing of saying I'm not that heavy a historian, but it says Captain America formulated by myself and Joe Simon, created in Joe's apartment, submitted to Atlas, meaning like something that would fall within the copyright thing that was just about to come up in 1976 to say this was something that was done prior, which has been Joe Simon's assessment every time Captain America's copyright has come up. Came up in 66, came up again in 2001 or something like that. And then you go to Kirby's testimony. What is he? It's different. He says that he talk about Captain America's shield, and then it says discussions were primarily between Joe Simon and myself in the Timely offices. And he talks about, and he ends his deposition that went to court in the when he was on Marvel's side, saying that I felt whatever I did for Timely belonged to Timely, and that was a practice in those days. So it's like he is defending the fact that this was produced in the office with Joe Simon. Everything was done by them. It stays in house. That's his statement on here. So to change a statement in 6 or 7 years and say it was done in Joe's house, it's just like, what? Okay, now that's over. He didn't get no money from Marvel after this. So then they're like, oh, it was actually done in Joe's house. You can't, and this is, it's like, correcting God, but it's like, how do you, when you have someone that's wrong about certain things, how does that, it starts to snowball. But for Kirby, well, we just forgot that. And then it's like, we won't let Stan get a break on any of the things that he's done. It was like, oh, that's him being the devil. And ultimately, the harder part is Sergeant Fury. With Sergeant Fury, he says that he created him, and we have Steve Ditko, who was surprised that Stan Lee was doing a war comic. So he said, well, why are you guys doing a war comic? And he said, Martin Goodman wanted a war comic. And they said that basically Martin Goodman said, hey, can you do that same thing that you did a Fantastic Four as a war comic? And Sam's like, yeah, we could probably do that. Now, this is not to say that as the artist that Kirby did nothing. This is to say that it's probably a very stripped down idea that, or it could be a detail. But a lot of times we've seen Stan have a very simple idea that he hands off, or we see the plot to Fantastic Four #1 could have been either or, and then ultimately the design factor, how they looked, all that stuff, this falls under Kirby's thing. So it would be either somewhere between 50-50, maybe more one, more the other, who knows? Like, but at the same time, let's not just keep yanking, this when it's too hard to just say, then we would have to take what Stan says at face value too. Or we're just knocking out everything Kirby does. Everything Stan does is BS, and everything that Kirby does, and even when he is incorrect about stuff, where he gets rid of the people that are suing Marvel now, Larry Lieber, Don Rico, whose name we haven't heard. I think Disney's probably the only one that put his name up in the the special thanks. But it's like we have the evil Disney put in Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, Don Heck, and Jack Kirby for Iron Man, and then the comic industry is saying just Jack Kirby, none of those guys. And it's wrong in my opinion to do that, and it's wrong to sort of just take this sort of handwritten thing and say this is proof. Like, I could sit down and write down, it would have no merit, but it's just
It's dishonest. We don't know when it was written.
yeah.
Okay, we don't know when it was written. Okay, and it's not official. It's not official memorandum or anything of that nature. But see, that's the trouble, because once you start going down that route, you get into the point where you're going to be assailing Kirby, and Kirby's already looked upon as this victim by too many people. So then it'd be like, oh, literally, it becomes like some Me Too stuff. Oh, you can't blame the victim. You can't blame. I'm like, but like, no, this is not true.
Mm-hmm.
This is not true. There's too many. There's too many people. There's too many people, including Kirby himself, who have said stuff different than this. And then to come later, well, his memory was bad. I was like, his memory. It gets to the point where like his memory might have been bad, but he remembered how to lie. He remembered how to do this. And then oh man. But see, that for me would be like this really hard place to be. Like, am I not gonna really go after Kirby and say, look at this guy, he falsified documents, this type of to try to steal credit, and then knowing how much of a powerhouse this guy was, knowing how influential the art was, knowing how influential it was that he was there on these books. And the biggest thing for me is that nobody seems, it's that 1961 to 1964 period. That's all anybody cares about when it comes to Kirby. Just those Marvel characters. That's it. Anything that he did, the work he did, okay, there's no argument about Captain America. Nobody cares about that. There's no argument about any of the work he did on Captain Marvel or any of the stuff in the interim between, say, what is this now, like 41 and 61. There's nothing about that. Nobody cares about any of that. It's like he didn't exist until 61 to 64. And then after that, he doesn't exist anymore either. You have all that stuff that he did with the New Gods, and that is 100% his. 100% his. And nobody talks about that. Everybody wants to talk about he didn't get what credit. Like somehow they're going to get it. Like somehow by them talking about it and putting this stuff up, they're championing some cause. I'm like, no. The idea, we know where the idea from the Fantastic Four came from. We know that Martin Goodman looked over at DC, saw how well, and this is a Marvel thing since 61. These guys, hey, what are DC doing? Hey, that looks good. Let's do the same thing. DC moves to Los Angeles. Hey, get out the Periscope. What's going on? What are they doing? Oh yeah, let's try the same thing. Let's do some vampires. So that's been going on for a long time. But Martin Goodman looked, saw how well the Justice League, how well the Justice League of America was doing, and said, look, let's do something like that. And then there's there's the famous conversation of Stan Lee with his wife, where he's like, I don't want to do these type of characters. He's like, why don't you do the characters you want to do? And you see the change, right? You see the change. We got to see Kirby's strength as a writer with the New God stuff, and you can clearly see the difference. You can clearly see the difference in the writing style at the end of the day. All the stuff that people would give that today people would get stand, oh, look at this, that, and the other. That's not how comics were written previous to all of that. And all you have to do is read them. All you have to do is read them. So that's that. But then you can, I mean, there's all this great stuff that he did. And then for these guys to keep championing this prevarication at the end of the day is just, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it hits a wall at a certain point. It hits a wall because everything, all the other stuff is already established. So if you go running with this, oh, Kirby, this, that, all it takes is someone to ask 3 or 4 questions and it runs aground. So I don't understand this at all. And it's, for me, it's like Captain Marvel versus Superman. I love both of those characters equally. If anybody wins, I'm heartbroken either way. So with this, I'd rather see those guys adventure together and do something together and be happy that way. This, all it's going to do is, you assail Stan, I'm unhappy. But if you assail Kirby, I'm unhappy. But to see this type of stuff without the proper due diligence that I know these guys could do, it's irresponsible. And it just hits a wall at the end of the day. And then when it does, could you imagine people putting up stuff about Kirby the liar, Kirby the prevaricator, Kirby the absent-minded professor, Kirby the has-been? That would burn my blood just as well. But you can't do this stuff.
Well, one of the things he says in this passage here kind of gives you the reasons why he kind of wrote this. And it seems like, I think he said he wrote it in the 80s, right? So this is around the time he was talking about going back to Marvel, and then they gave him the thing for the old. Because years everyone talked about it, and they kept saying that it was all of his artwork, and it was stuff from before. They were trying to keep as much of the old stuff as they could, but with the Kirby stuff, they kind of added a longer release form for it, and that's where Kirby saw that, and it was kind of had issue. But then I think people are trying to go to the origins of Marvel Comics. We see, let me go ahead and share the screen. You see here in this passage, we talk about how, the origins of Marvel Comics, and they're saying his role diminished, and not just as a pair of hands. Stan Lee did talk about the Marvel method of giving the artist a plot, not a full script, or giving Larry Lieber a plot, and then him writing a script, and then that sort of thing. But the Marvel method is mentioned. It doesn't say that they're co-creators in any of that thing. But what was going on in 1974, outside of giving credit for, the artist's work for plot, people forget that besides the original artwork, Kirby had threw shots at Stan. And the fact that he didn't erase his name from those books in the origins of Marvel Comics, because that's basically what we know, that they took the creators of Superman's name off of Superman for a while. Like they removed it. So it's like in other creators. So one of the things that they kind of say, oh, well, why weren't they, basically, like celebrating how much Kirby did in his origins of Marvel Comics? It was like, well, they were at odds. They're asking Marvel to celebrate Kirby outside of saying how great the work was, which Stan did. And they're just like, oh, well, he needs to say more. What did they need him to say is Kirby created all this stuff, and luckily he was here, he kept the lights on. And instead of saying, no, he did help keep the lights on. But some of the other aspects, even when Kirby was doing a handful of the plotting, the dialogue is also helping those books through. That's why Stan didn't even stop fighting over who created what. He started fighting just for the dialogue and saying all those words were mine. And even that was tough on Kirby. That's why they've gone to the descriptions around the panels as actual script, when you can look at that and say it's not actual script. And Stan is not fighting the plot anymore. He stopped fighting the plot a long time ago. He started saying the dialogue. And, so that's one of the things that's kind of hard to say, because they try to factor it all in, but they also forget that Kirby wasn't basically a top creator going to Marvel as, I'm the big dog, give me your top books. He was, he had left DC, the door was swinging, almost hitting him as he exited, regretfully. You know, he did some great work for DC, and obviously it was stuff that he was planning to do for a decent amount of time, but he had a lawsuit that he was struggling with. So it's just tough that these things are sort of put out, and say, here's his assessment of it. You know, and it's like when people found the fake Kirby this drawing of Spider-Man, and they realized it was an actual Giant Man picture. And someone put it next to the Spider-Man logo, you know, and people bought it. So, and they were saying, "See, this is his creation. That was his design. That's what he did." And it's before that, and there's pages of it. So he's co-creator of Spider-Man. It's like, well, you chuck his thing, you do another version. How does he become a Kirby Spider-Man? Which is, I don't know. I'd never thought I'd be at this place where I would be have to say that, you know, let's not torch everybody else, because I was like, hey, of Kirby not, you know, getting enough as co-plotter and co-creator, and then to start to read some of the stuff he said, and then even the, you know, the artist who died, like Stan's best friend, was it Manili, that dude, Joe Manili, that dude who basically by mistake fell off the tracks and died, or train tracks and died, and it, you know, hurt Stan a lot. But Kirby said, oh, he fell off the tracks because he was thinking about all that work that Stan was giving him with no credit. Like, like that is the worst thing to say. That is just terrible. And people, that's in the Stanley unauthorized thing. I'm just like, how can we wouldn't allow Stan to get away with that just because of it just hurt.
It's like, how do you put something like that out? Okay, how do you put something like that knowing it's not true, but just for the salacious nature of it, hey, let's do it anyway.
But it was gone. It was out. It was gone. And the thing is, like, that's why no one in the book, they're saying the book is real, everything else is BS, right? Anything Stan says is BS. That book is real. But no one is saying that portion of it. Nobody's saying that the guy doesn't even like the Ravage 2099 doesn't even have the basis of Ravage. They called Paul Ryan the writer because they're trying to continue the narrative that the artists were the writers, because it's, this Marvel style means that the artist is the writer. And it's like, no, the artist would have to do a lot of work, but they weren't, and they could change and do stuff they wanted. But the initial idea, like more of the springboard, and like at that point, comparing the 90s sort of 90s plotting to what Stan was doing when he had he had like 25 books and he was the only guy, and at some point Roy Thomas was coming in there, but Roy is doing Millie the Model. Yeah, he's gonna lean on the artist more than more the work he was doing, because he's editing and he has to field whatever what's that guy what Martin Goodman wanted to do. So it's like, yeah, I totally think that the artist did a lot of heavy lifting, but let's not take away from the part that was really also selling it. It wasn't like, okay, here's this cool design by the artist, which, okay, Spider-Man, that's like the coolest thing ever, right? What's the name said? Like, there's a ton of articles by Steve Ditko that they would hash out the plots. Only thing he said that there was no script. He says in here, it says script. It's not a script. He either plot or we talked it out. He says either 1 or 2 page thing or that. He's saying that's what it is. That's what Stan said it is. Somehow it's not that with Kirby. Somehow it's, and then there's Stan saying that sometimes I give him a plot, sometimes I didn't. Sometimes he'd come just give me the story. Sometimes I tell him it's Dr. Doom, do it going with Dr. Doom. Sometimes he'd come in trying to say that they were collaborators, and that was not even enough. That's before even anything. But they're like, nope, he needs to give in and say he was just somebody that sat at a desk doing nothing and getting ghostwriters to do his work for him.
And I've said this before, that right there is the biggest misconception. It got too much traction because again, in another world, Stan is middle management and he never got credit for anything. He never got credit for anything. And then we come over here, and again, he's middle management. He's getting his directives from Martin Goodman. All right. If Stan can't just have an idea and put it in, that stuff has to be cleared. And then he's being told, look, I want see these things happen. Okay, go make it work. Go do this. Go make Fantastic Four, but make them in World War II, make them soldiers, that sort of stuff. And he goes over there, and it either, because not everything hit. Not everything hit from that period. Everybody looks, oh, is it nice? Not everything hit. There's a lot of stuff that people don't know about and don't necessarily care about either, just the hits at the end of the day. But the idea that Stan Lee was like, oh, I was just sitting here and these guys are creating all this stuff. Like, no, you got to look at all that stuff that came out. And Stan had to not only necessarily do dialogue for, or come up with the plot, or come up with the script. And he got to the point that he was so involved with everything at that point. That's where you get the Marvel method from. And he had guys who could do it. He had that, the guys who were talented enough and they were enough in sync that they could do that. And then that Marvel method continues over, but you hear from the guys later on, they're like, what? That's a lot of work. A lot of work at the end of the day. Can I get a script rather than me have to, go through this? It's one of the reasons why, with the exception, or like the rare exception, but I won't get into all of that. That was just me taking shots at them, which I like to do. But, with the rare exception, we see people still doing it. But the idea, he was still editor. This means this guy still had to edit all these books. And this is in the day of an editor, not what they're doing today. We're like, oh, it looks good. Let it go. No, this is an actual editor where he's looking at this. Okay, we got to change this, got to fix that. What? The numbers aren't where they are. Okay, let's try a different suit. Let's try this. Let's try that. All of these things that he would have to do. And all of that seems to just go out the window. He was just there sitting, he's just there kicking back, not contributing anything to this. And the biggest thing people seem to always neglect is that none of this stuff would have gotten as big as it was without Stan as like this willing. Literally, he was the band leader for these comics. He was the guy who was willing to go out there and talk. And you got that article where they attribute all the credit to Stan, but it's not like he told them this. This is what these guys were getting because Stan was like the face and the front man for all of this. And even when it was time to sell Marvel, the guys knew it. They wanted him to stay, but he was the guy going out and selling this stuff and doing the talks. He liked it. He was enjoying it. Nobody knew. And the thing is, at this point, you're just having fun. Nobody know the book is selling. Some stuff over here. Nobody sees $1 billion movies. Okay, from this type of stuff, comics were still like were stuff. These are for kids. So if we're selling some T-shirts and we're getting some cartoons and we're able to get some this type of books for people who might be interested in it, no problem. But the long-term stuff, again, like Siegel and if he had known that Superman was going to blow up in the manner that it did within a couple of years, would have been a totally different situation. And everybody, it's always the same thing. Once people realize what it is, it's a different story. But it's the same thing of we're going to deny Stan any due credit. Okay, and we're gonna overindulge Jack Kirby, okay, with credit that shouldn't even necessarily even be there, or even we're gonna countenance that he's saying it's possible that could be true.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the hard part is, and every time Kirby had an issue in that article, they've kind of turned it into that Stan was grandstanding, somehow taking credit from Jack Kirby while Jack Kirby was in the room and Stan wanted him in the room as saying, we're the guys that do the Fantastic Four and a number of other books. And one thing that Mark Evans hasn't said recently is that Kirby was a fan of the writer, and that's the thing that they kind of miss. And they kind of say, well, Stan was grandstanding, and I kind of drew it like, no, like the guy thought Stan was a guy, but at the same time, the way he wrote about the plotting, he said that Stan is doing has an ESP session with the artist, saying he's talking to him, and you can hear the plot, and people are like, oh no, that's like they don't want that to be like, oh, that was They talked about it before. Then why is Kirby saying, yeah, oh, okay, great. And then he goes. The plot is a bare bones plot. The story itself has been changed entirely, like the ending of it, leading into a which would be a four-part Doctor Doom story. But the Doctor Doom was supposed to be in the story that Stan Lee said, and it's just like, and Kirby changed it. So it's like this isn't taking away from Kirby, but they're like, any idea that Stan Lee plotted something or told Kirby to do something, it's just like we got to get rid of that. And it's just like, and the fact that the writer said ESP session is like, that's not, that's not saying that he co-created, but it's like saying, like, how do these books get done? Well, the other thing is it's something that was in Mad Magazine of the functionally illiterate, where you can read it, but you're thinking, no, he needs to say that Kirby co-created here, or else it's not worth it. When at the same time, it's like you saying, at the end of the day, Stan doesn't own it. When there were issues with original art, like I think Joe Sinnott wanted one splash page. He's like, "Can I get a splash page from from some of this work, especially something from me and Kirby? Like, I want why do I have to have, just because I'm the inker, I have to only get this? One of these times, can I get a splash page?" And then at the same time, something else was going on with that because writers used to get a page. So, but Stan wrote a letter to Jim Shooter and said, "Hey, can you work this out so Joe can get a splash page from his run with Kirby?" And it's just like, I thought he's supposed to be the guy that could clear up the original art. No, like even as publisher, he can't clear up that stuff. It's just like that's too much of a headache. I'm out here doing my whatever he was doing, and going to the meetings for the TV stuff and doing this thing. And it's just like, hey, even if he's struggling with them too, like it's just asking a lot of for him to be like this guy that gave all the credit, gives no credit to himself. And Kirby was going through the struggle with the original art, that whether being a party to it, like the whole industry was a party to it being like DC, even DC signed the paper, but DC used to mulch, like to shred that stuff because they're like, we're not paying the taxes on it. We don't want them to have it either. All that classic Kirby stuff, and all those other people just shredding away. Or you could go in and steal it back. But that's it's just I get it, because nowadays the wave to give Kirby credit, which kind of and I think Berners always said it's really there were Kirby fans, but the wave really happened post Image, where Image guys were saying we got screwed like Kirby, even though they were getting royalties on $1 million comic books, decent royalties, like
Kirby wish he was screwed like that.
but they, in saying that, people were like, it kind of built a lot of steam. And then post that, you had even if because I think for me, around that stage, I mean, I always liked the later Kirby stuff anyway, and so I was still buying that because it still looked close. It was obviously there's at that point, what's he, like late 50s doing the late 70s stuff that was going on. So it's like there's a difference in quality, because obviously they're saying his eyesight is struggling. So like, yeah, there's a change. But it's like, as a kid, it's like that's the closest thing to the origins of Marvel Comics. So I'm buying that stuff too. So, but the idea that they keep looking at it and saying every point that Stan Lee wasn't able to give Kirby entire credit, even the joking plot that Kirby did, saying that they sit back and forth arguing about what the stories are going to be, which John Romita Jr. said they did it in the car, where they both would talk about the stories, and they would both talk about it in different ways, where Stan and Jack would both feel like they came out of the plotting session of them agreeing with each other, but they both were on different wavelengths, and that sort of thing. And it's like, nope, none of that. The car rides that John Romita was in, he was lying. Like, and this is just to say that they were co-creators. It's to say that's all. I'm not, we've talked about this. We're not taking anything away from Kirby. We're just saying, we understand he's mad. He wanted like he got issues with Marvel. All that stuff is valid, but then when you got to keep taking and hitting, hitting Stan Lee with the, that he was just terrible and he did all this stuff and he should have done this and
We
he's
have a
pointing.
phrase for that. It's called bitter old man.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's ultimately Stan didn't really want Kirby to go. It could have been a thing where he was old and he'd be kicked out of the company, but even up to that point, like before they sent him the letter, they wanted to work with him again. They wanted him to do. They were trying to bring him back to Marvel again. So that's not to say Marvel is in the right for what they were doing with the original art, but they were still wanted to work with him. So there wasn't any sign of. Well, I think the issue is that I think Mark Evans did say it that when Kirby left, he decided to go over Stan's head, and he wanted a contract from the new owners, and they sent him a contract, which I think was lower than what he was getting from Stan, because Stan was gradually bumping him up whenever he needed more money. He kept bumping him up, I guess without telling them, and they're like, "Okay, he is here," and because John Buscema said, he said, they gave him a pay cut, and that's why he left. That's why he quit. So it's like there might be something to that, and because but I don't have that, and I don't have any way to have the two statements from Mark Evaner and John Buscema. I don't have any way to prove it, but ultimately we don't know that he would have ever left. Whether he would have moved on from the Fantastic Four, done the New Gods, and they would have kind of worked them into the thing. What if he would have stayed? Would we have been going through this? So they would have had him doing a sort of a nice desk job where he's kind of, doing covers and like working in the office. And well, he moved to California, so you can't really say he was going to do that stuff. But
Like Neil Adams before Neil Adams.
yeah, we just figure out what they could do, what he could do at that stage, or saying, okay, well, maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe him and Stan, because they were already doing the animation, maybe he could be out there with him. They'd be like two guys, because that's what Mark Evans said. The people don't like saying it, but when they got together, they would be buddies. They would, like when they were doing animation together, and they say Stan wanted Kirby for the animation, and even though the Fantastic Four show in the '70s didn't work out, they would be together from time to time and talk, and that led to them doing the Silver Surfer thing. I thought it was part of the original contract, but ultimately, I think the last thing he did was either with the Machine Man and Devil Dinosaur, and then he left. But then he said a little while after that, since they were doing animation, they're like, "Hey, we can do that. We can do Silver Surfer together. We talked about it, and then they did it. So good times and bad times. But to put it out, to put out this sort of thing as like without a statement saying there's no way to prove that this is not an ironclad thing, and it also goes against his statement that where he was deposed. That's something that was in court, right? So this is in court. He can write whatever he wants, but it goes against what he said earlier. So there's no way to unearth new information or say he forgot. So we have to say some of this stuff.
Because there's no new information. He didn't forget this stuff. I'm pretty certain there might be. I'm pretty certain there might be finer details. Like
Mhm.
he might forget. Like, oh, it happened in the morning. No, it happened in the afternoon. Yeah, yeah, that's okay. But I'm positive. If his memory's that bad, then it becomes like, oh, okay, we can't trust you for anything.
That's
How
the
do you know what we created? We can only go by what you said in court. And in court, you didn't say any of this.
That's the thing. If you negate both of their memories, then you also then you have someone that like Ditko hasn't wavered on talking about Sergeant Rock, the Spider-Man creation, like stuff like that, and in those things of say having working with the editor where he was working with them up to I think Spider-Man 18, and then at some point there they stopped. Stan Lee stopped talking to Ditko. But I don't know. That said, I expect better out of these guys, and the comic historians. They're still doing the thing of siding with the people we like. Every time they on back issue on Facebook or the Marvel thing, whenever a Kirby, a Lee thing, Jim, when the Stan Lee thing comes, they have to block it off because it just turns into total bile, and nobody can make a statement without someone saying, "You don't know that. You need to go read this, that, and the other," which everyone's read all the same stuff. We all know the same stuff. Stop this stuff trying to be the nerd splain anything. Everyone, all information is out there. You just have to unearth it. But I guess it's gonna have to say this, end on a sour note. Sorry to have to go through this on one of my favorite creators. Spin rack
Out.